I lost my dad to a rare disease that kind of made his brain shrivel within itself. It was sad seeing him losing his memories and everything within the matter of months. He went brain dead, but at his last hours he laid in his bed, and for a few brief seconds he became lucid and said to me the most random thing he could ever say, Blue Pot Mike, the blue one. He would always say random things even before this disease just to confuse others. It was his type of humor and always like seeing the confusion it would cause. At those last few brief seconds I had my dad back, but an hour later, he just gave out and let himself go. After a few days, we buried him, grieved like how everyone would do. That next weekend, my mom decided to take me and my younger sister out to the cabin where he always liked being just for memory's sake. It was hard arriving and driving down that gravel road, 'cause he would always sing to the tune of Carry On My Wayward Son. 'Cause that's just how excited he would be, just being here. But since he was gone, I did it for him. I sang the song. We all did 'cause it was for him. Of course, we all cried even as we pulled up to the cabin. We sat in the SUV catching our breaths and coping with the loss. The first night was hard, but it would be easier since my uncle and cousin were coming the next day to spend time with us, which I was looking forward to. Just around early evening, when we knew the sun was going down, Mom asked if we wanted to take a walk to the store down the road to grab some snacks for the night, and of course we did. Dad always loved that store because they had cool knick-knacks and other stuff that he would find cool. Plus him, knowing the store owner and talking for however long the way he used to. We went for the walk, which was just a mile away and a mile back. The scenery was always beautiful, and the trees being so tall and green was just the kind of sights we needed, and not to mention the river, which always glistened the sun's reflection so beautiful. As we were walking back to the cabin, it had started to get dark. The sky was a dark blue, and the sun had disappeared behind the trees. My mom was holding my sister's hand as I trailed behind them about 20 feet away, listening to my music and playing with a toy I had bought from my dad's fireplace. Collection of junk toys. While walking, something caught my attention to the left of me. Something moving about in the bushes. I slowed my pace and looked but couldn't see it anymore. It might have been a bear or deer that was just passing by, but I couldn't get a decent view of what it was, so I kept walking. I'm not sure what prompted to take out my headphones at that time, but when I did, I heard the moving in the bushes again. It happened at the place where I looked. I turned around to walk backwards, hoping to see an animal crossing, but when I stopped, I seen what it was, and it immediately chilled me too. The bone. It hadn't fully come onto the road, but it was almost clear enough to see. I dropped toy I was fiddling with, and my mom and sister noticed that I stopped, and they came up behind me. Mom, taking my hand, gently bent, "What is it? You okay?" I averted her attention to where I was looking, at my eyes started to fill with tears as she looked. I hear her gasp in my ear as my sister wrapped her arms tightly around my mother. The thing slowly stepped out from the bush and staggered onto the road with its head down, dragging its feet. We all watched in horror as it lifted its head up to look at us, and we seen this thing looked like my dad. It looked like him, but it wasn't him. Couldn't be. Its face looked mishaped. One eye swollen looking and blue lips with an almost gray complexion. It staggered, and it took sight of us, stretching out its arms as we were a good 50 to 60 yards away down the road. My heart skipped so many beats, which have me palpitations of fear, and my mom gasping for air as my sister let out a cry and started to pull at my mom's hand. We watched this. thing take the shape of my dad walking towards us, so inhuman-like. The clothes looked fake, like it was sort of blending, and the feet were bare. Hair was a mess. It was walking, trying its best to imitate my dad, but it looked so off. I slowly started to walk toward it, thinking it really was him. Intrusive thoughts entered my mind, thinking he was alive, and he was with us, but somewhere inside me knew he was really gone. Slowly, I stepped towards this thing, believing his death was just a dream, but the one thing that snapped me back to reality was my mother grabbing my arm and tugging me. "Let's go. Come on, Mike, let's go. See, let's go right now. That's not your father. That's not him." I immediately started to hyperventilate and moved along with my mother's tugging. We all walked backwards, crying, watching this thing walk towards us, kicking up dust below its bare feet. It began to smile, a sorry excuse of a haunting smile, as it stumbled slightly. We all cried, backing away as it kept moving toward us, with its arms still out, while Mom kept repeating, "It's not him. It's not him. It's not him." The thing frowned upon hearing my mom's cracking voice, and what it did next really broke all our spirits, our hopes and dreams of wishing it really was him. It began to hum the song Wayward Son, attempted to sing the words at one point but couldn't manage. My mom grasped at her chest and shoved me aside and let out a yell of grief so haunting that it echoed into the open, "You're not him! Get away!" I picked up my sister and grabbed my mom's hand, and we began to run while still crying heavily, trying to catch our breaths. We reached the bend on the road, and I quickly took one look back at the thing that looked like my father, and its arms were still stretched out, as if it wanted a hug and had a frown on its face, like asking why we were running away from it. When we reached the road to the cabin, which was a 5-minute walk, I sent my mom and sister ahead. Their safety was my main concern at that point. They went running to the cabin as I stayed on the road listening to this thing coming around the corner. I watched as it still had its arms out when he appeared. It began to smile at the sight of me. I stood looking at it. "You're not my dad. You're not my dad. You're not my dad." It smiled a smile even wider than before. The smile looked like no human smile could ever make, 'cause it stretched nearly from ear to ear, almost. It stopped at the entrance of the cabin road and didn't move an inch, even as I moved a few steps closer, repeating, "You're not my dad. You're not my dad. You're not my dad." And then it did it. It spoke. Mike. Blue Pot Mike. My eyes once again immediately filled with tears as I turned away, walking towards the cabin, still muttering the words Mike. "Blue Pot? Blue Pot? Blue Pot, Mike?" I gasped behind my pain and came up to the cabin and stopped at the door, turned around taking one last look, and all I seen was the thing's feet past the corner of trees, listening to it drags its feet walking down the road. After walking in, I closed the door and leaned against it, my mom holding my sister as she wailed Daddy, while Mom petting her hair, gently wiping away her own tears of shock and grief. My uncle came with my cousin the next day, and we never told them what had happened. How could we cause the thought of telling him we seen his brother last night? Wouldn't be good for his mental state. It was hard enough going through what we did, what we seen and heard. How this thing knew all that it did that night wonders me to no end. A process of torment it likes to inflict. Maybe an apparition of some kind of spirit. Or Wendigo, Skinwalker. I'm not sure, but whatever it was. It's not my dad. It's not him. The mysterious demise of my father in his room while he was engrossed in his project had raised numerous concerns, although he wished to die since long because of a prolonged illness. My mother had become partially unhinged afterwards, and I had left Dad's project unfinished despite my promise to him that I would complete it if anything were to happen. My father had held high hopes for the project. I used to accompany him whenever he worked on it. However, on that day, I couldn't, as I wasn't at home. On that particular day, I was out with Margaret, the love of my life. Despite frequently referring to her as imperfect, she meant everything to me. Her imperfections, which I never appreciated, were numerous. Some notable ones included her being a terrible cook, an awful driver, and incredibly shy. I had always wished to reshape those facets of her personality. I genuinely longed for an ideal version of Margaret, the perfection I had always envisioned her to achieve. So, without a second thought, and regardless of the promise I'd made to Mom to never touch Dad's unfinished project, I found myself with no option but to break that promise. I began working on the project and, with the grace of God and my father's guidance, completed it in less than a month. The AI that Dad and I had been working on achieved partial consciousness, exactly as intended. Its purpose was to link with the individual whose persona you aimed to modify. This required attaching it to the person's brain, and consequently, it would simulate half of that person's persona. I blindfolded Margaret and promised her a significant surprise, under the condition that she remain blindfolded throughout. I then connected the necessary equipment to her brain. Things proceeded smoothly. The computer screen displayed the words, 100 success, consciousness successfully uploaded. However, as soon as I removed Margaret's blindfold, her behavior became exceedingly erratic. She would alternate between behaving like a 60-year-old man and returning to her regular self in the blink of an eye. In her persona as the elderly man, she would laugh, almost reminiscent of an evil spirit. However, when she reverted to her own self, she would weep and plead with me to save her. "It's your dad," Margaret screamed abruptly. "Your dad is seizing control of my mind. He's binding my astral self to a void within my brain. Please help," were her final words. Subsequently, Margaret vanished, leaving only my father within her body, as it turns out. It was at that moment that I comprehended that my father had already uploaded his consciousness, and there was no AI consciousness at all. He had always harbored the desire for immortality. On that day, I strolled alone, clutching a bag of sandwiches procured from a restaurant near my office. Within moments, 2 street dogs bounded towards me. Feeling a surge of fear, I instinctively sprinted away. Unbeknownst to me initially, as a bike zoomed by at around 60 miles per hour, I realized the astonishing speed at which I was running. So swift was my pace that I even outpaced several vehicles on the road. The experience was surreal. Perhaps the adrenaline brought on by the pursuit of the dogs, threatening to sink their teeth into my leg, compelled my body to move at such an incredible velocity. Amid my elation and bewilderment, happiness mingled with confusion. I couldn't fathom how a human could achieve such rapidity. A day later, Following my customary gym session that night, I found myself on the treadmill, running with such ferocity that the friction ignited the treadmill belt into flames. Subsequent nights brought about increasingly strange occurrences. I awoke to a racing heartbeat, propelled by an inexplicable urge to run endlessly. And so I dashed from my home, propelled by an inexplicable need to keep moving. I was fortunate to have my phone with me, as I had covered an astonishing distance of 30 miles. The situation was bizarre and unsettling. Yet another night brought me to consciousness, though this time my heart rate was normal. A sharp pain persisted near my lungs and liver, coupled with a sensation of my chest skin being seared from within. These feelings proved not to be imagined. Moments later, through tear-filled eyes caused by the intense and unbearable agony, I watched in astonishment as my heart slowly emerged from my chest. It fully detached itself, though the veins still tethered it to my body, ensuring a flow of blood to my brain. In an almost surreal turn of events, my heart began communicating with me. Its consciousness was palpable, resonating within my brain. I pleaded with it to cease its departure, as its exit would inevitably mean my demise. The response it provided was unexpected. I feel claustrophobic inside. Peter and I were at the beach that day, feeling bored at home, so we decided to spend some time by the sea. Beaches had always been our antidote to boredom. Whenever we felt dull, we used to head to the nearby beach. We were right there at our favorite beach that day when an old man selling toys approached us and begged us to make a purchase. We didn't want to, so we shook our heads in refusal. I'm extremely extroverted, and Peter is an introvert. Without a second thought, I scolded the toy seller when he forced us for the third time in a row to buy something. He looked me in the eye. Being a bit short, tempered myself, I played along and started to stare back at him. Peter was advising me not to escalate the matter and to leave instead. "Let's go, friend. Your uncle must be waiting for you," Peter said. I didn't listen to Peter. He and I were locked in a gaze when, all of a sudden, I slapped Peter. It was probably because he kept insisting I leave, even though I didn't intend to. Upon reaching home, I apologized to Peter. However, my headache was severe, and I had difficulty concentrating on whatever Peter was saying. I took a pill and went to sleep. Upon waking up, I went directly to Peter's room. He asked if I was okay, but I didn't answer. I left for my uncle's house, where he inquired about my day, but again, I didn't respond. I started to slap him, hitting him numerous times so forcefully that he died right there. After taking his life, I returned home. Peter was playing a game. I sat beside him and strangled him with the controller's wire, ending his life instantly. After killing Peter, a sense of sorrow welled up within me. I regretted what I had done, much like the feeling I experienced after slapping my uncle to death. Overcome with confusion, I went straight to the beach, where I saw the old man once more smiling at me. "Lost in my thoughts!" I yelled. Peter, but he didn't appear." The old man continued to smile. Suddenly, he began moving his index and middle fingers, prompting me to walk. He manipulated his thumb, and I started to jump. He clenched his fist, and I folded. It became evident that I was under his control, a puppet manipulated by him through invisible strings of his mind attached to mine. He moved his fingers again, making me walk toward him. As we stood a foot apart, He looked me in the eye and said, "Never look a stranger in the eye." He left me on my own, and I was no longer under his control. However, I heard someone shout, "Stay right there, hands on your head." It was the police. They arrived and arrested me,